That's um, the handout is showing, and those of you online, you will see the page as we go through. I found that to be very helpful to have all the kings of northern tribes and southern tribes in a chronological order, and the years and how long they were kings and what relationship they were in, and how they performed and things like that. It was just a really good summary. But anyway, today we're gonna continue in the book of Kings. Tracy covered the first Kings last week, and today we are covering the second Kings. And this is the outline of what we're gonna try to cover. Author of Second Kings, some claims it's Jeremiah, but it's not conclusive. So rather than guessing, I think it's safe to say author is unknown. And I don't know if Dave Brown is online, but last time when I taught, covered the book of Ruth, and I put the date up, and he said, was it a date written or a date covered? So here is just for Dave. It was written between 561 and 538 BC, but it covers the period of 841 to 598 BC. The themes, overview, and gospel, this is where the Christ, what does this book talks about? How does it bring up the Christ? The themes will also show how does it fit and all that kind of stuff. And then of course the application. It's not just enough to learn about, read about, but how we can apply to our lives. So any questions so far? Okay. So themes. This is basically the story of two group of people, two sets of kingdom. And how they, Israel, the northern kingdom, and the Judah, the southern kingdom. And what Lord required, especially for the kings. And we're going to look at that in detail, the Deuteronomy 17. And this is a no-brainer. I mean, this has been a theme throughout. God says, you obey me and you will be blessed. You disobey me, then you'll be cursed. The other way to say, you obey me, you will have life. If you disobey me, you will have death. I mean, that's just same theme that's been, it's been from Genesis all the way to Revelation, right? And in spite of rebellious and disobedience of his children, God is a promise keeper, and he continues to keep his word. And he tries to get his people to heed his warning through prophets. And this is no exception in this book. And again, the Lord is a promise keeper, and he's covenant, promise, all of that, right? And this one particularly talks about, I think, the covenant with the David. And we're going to look at the Second Samuel verses in detail as well. So the theme is the disobedience people, but yet God keeps his promise, and what he's clearly specifies what his desire is, what he's saying that what the kings need to do. Okay, so as you can see that from the handout, you see, let me look at it too. You see the top portion, the kings of Israel, and the bottom portion, the kings of Judah. And it says, the column that says character, it says bad and good, right? So before we go into, who was bad or good, I thought we need to spend some time based upon God's word. What made a king good or bad? What do you think that made a king good or bad?
If they follow God.
Yeah. Just like he's telling his people, you obey and you will be blessed. You disobey, you'll be cursed. I mean, that's the same theme, right?
So they were not following Deuteronomy at all.
Right, so we're gonna go to that. And then the part one will be that the first 17 chapters focuses mainly on the northern kingdom. There's some interspersed to the southern kingdom, but we know the northern kingdom is conquered by Assyrians in chapter 17. Chapter 17 is pretty sad. And part two is the southern kingdom, covers the only the southern kingdom, that chapters 18 to the 25. And then I added this thing, what now? Because both northern kingdom and southern kingdom, northern kingdom by Assyrians and southern kingdom by Babylonians, they are no longer. So what now? It's not the end of the story, right? So let's look at Deuteronomy 17, 14 through 20. So if you would please turn to Deuteronomy 17. And then we're gonna actually spend, I know this is not a book on the lesson on the Deuteronomy, but I think it is important to understand why these kings we're talking about are good or bad. So could I get someone to read Deuteronomy 17, 14 through 20?
I will.
Thank you.
When you come to the land that the Lord your God is giving you, and you possess it and dwell in it, and then say, I will set a king over me, like all the nations that are around me, you may indeed set a king over you, whom the Lord your God will choose. One from among your brothers you shall set as king over you. You may not put a foreigner over you who is not your brother. Only he must not acquire many horses for himself or cause the people to return to Egypt in order to acquire many horses, since the Lord has said to you, you shall never return that way again. And he shall not acquire many wives for himself, lest his heart turn away, nor shall he acquire for himself excessive silver and gold. And when he sits on the throne of his kingdom, he shall write for himself in a book a copy of this law, approved by the Levitical priests. And it shall be with him, and he shall read it in all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear the Lord his God by keeping all the words of this law and these statutes and doing them, that his heart may not be lifted up above his brothers, and that he may not turn aside from the commandment either to the right hand or to the left, so that he may continue long in his kingdom, he and his children in Israel.
Thank you. So the first part, the verses 14, verse 14 says that because the people asked for king, right? He said he will give them a king. But verse 16 says, verse 16 is talking about the qualification of the king. It has to be somebody chosen by God. Now, will God choose someone who will be disobedient? So there is the reason why he says it has to be someone who's chosen by God. Someone who will fear him. It must be an Israelite. Why do you think that? In the verse 15, latter part of the 15, it says, you may not set a foreigner over you who is not your brother. Basically, has to be an Israelite.
They wouldn't have the same God.
Right, because the foreigners, they're not, first of all, they're not his chosen people. And that they have different idols they worship, different gods, right? I mean, so it's pretty logical. Now, and then verses 16 through 17, it talks about what he should not do. It says, must not acquire many horses. Now, horses signify the military strength, right? So you shouldn't be relying on military strength. Must not take multiple wives. Now, remember Solomon, the wisest person, had many, many wives. Mainly because of the political reason, right? So this is talking about relying on political alliances. That many times the kings married other country, other kingdoms. Or whatever, so the political alliances. Must not accumulate much silver and gold. The reliance on wealth. So why do you think he says must not in those three? What does it tell you?
Must rely on God.
Exactly. You get the gold star. Exactly. The reliance, your dependence should only come from God, not on any other things. Now, if you start relying on these things, what will happen? Not only that you do not depend on God, but what will happen? Go back to the very first bullet. You may not fear God as much, right? And the verses 18 through 20 talks about that how the king supposed to be a scribe and reader of the law. The law talking about Pentateuch, right? The first 5 books. The reason is because as you are into reading and keeping the God's law, it will help you keep humble. That's what he says. But also, fear of God will be there. So it's like, so you have to be chosen by God who fears God, but you have to continue to fear him, work on that. And the only way you can do is keeping and reading of his word. You see how it all ties? So these are the criteria for good king or bad king. Any questions so far?
Yeah, a lot of bad kings in northern Israel.
Yes. So let's continue on. So that's from clearly, God laid out very clearly the criteria, what a king's standards, the principles concerning the kings. So further expanding, the kings has to follow God's law, right? And will only worship Israel, the God of Israel only, not multiple gods or any other thing. That's just no brainer, right? And then as you read the 2 Kings, you will see that there have been many other gods because there are foreigners and everything else. And they set up altars and all that stuff. And the good king is supposed to get rid of all of those. Remember back in Joshua, God says the people who were in Canaan, they are to wipe out everybody, including the women and children. We thought that was so cruel. The reason is because they don't want, God doesn't want any remnants. That's not maybe the choice word. Any remainder of the foreign gods or customs or idol worships. And so as Israel's king, you're supposed to get rid of all of those. And destroy high places. Again, the worship happened in the different religious cultures and tribes set up their worshiping place in the high places, and then of course to remove all the idol worships. So I want to spend a little time on this map because it is kind of important to keep in mind. So here is Kingdom of Judah, is purplish, pinkish, and then Israel, Kingdom of Israel. So this is Southern Kingdom, that's the Northern Kingdom, the blue part. Now, the other part that I wanted to kind of bring to your attention is this Philistine, the Edomites, Moabites, Ammonites, and then there is Kingdom of Aram, and Assyrian Empire. Later, the Babylonians are coming into play. Now, the reason I wanted to spend a little time on this thing is because Judah has people coming from Philistine, Moabites, and Edom, that they are all kind of, wanting to take over Judah. And Israel had similar, where they border, Moab, Ammon, and Arameans later become, they are actually, Aramean is also called Syrians. Now, I had trouble understanding between Syrians and Assyrians. And I don't know if anybody else did or not. So I actually have a slide so that it was more for me, but does anybody else have a trouble? What is it? Who's the Syrian? And I thought they were the same, but they are not. Syrian and Assyrian.
Show me the slide.
I will. But anyway, so just keep in mind this map because it's kind of good to know where the land is situated and who are the neighbors, the border sharing, who are wanting to take over them, right? Okay.
So that's the boundary of the northern kingdom and southern kingdom.
Yes, and then
That's what God set those boundaries. They came in to that land from Egypt.
well, he actually set boundaries a lot further, but they didn't
They didn't take them.
right. Now, the other thing is the boundary between the southern kingdom and northern kingdom. And then the capital of northern kingdom is Samaria. They didn't start at the Samaria. They actually moved the capital. There were 4 different cities, and the final one was Samaria. And then southern kingdom's capital is Jerusalem.
Right.
So the star is showing the capital of. And then if you look at the Assyrian later, right now the Syrian, but later becomes the Assyrian, their capital is Damascus. And we know something about Damascus. Paul on the way to Damascus gets blind and all that, yeah, so. And then those of us who went to Israel and went to Jordan, there's the capital, Petra. Anyway, so there's this. So any question on this map? Okay.
Good map. It helped put.
Yeah, it's kind of, it's
Yeah.
good to have a perspective. And for those online, this is the handout I printed out and gave to everybody. So this is the one that summarizes all the kings and of the northern and southern tribe. And I was constantly looking back at this while I was reading the Second Kings because there are so many names going flip-flop, and I realized some of names are very similar. As like my eyes start glazing over, and this thing really helped. So hopefully this will be a good resource for you as you read through First King and Second Kings, not only the First, Second Kings, but also Chronicles, because Chronicles is basically covers the similar thing, but in a commentary way, right? Pam?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Susie,
So yes,
can you please email us those?
will do.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so that's that page. This is the where I was talking about Syria. Syria, remember in the map is at Aram? Yeah. They were if you look at the first few chapters of Second Kings, it's actually the Syrians who's making war against Northern Kingdom because they are, the boundary.
Right.
But later, so they were often in war with Israel. But they were later defeated by Assyria and they become absorbed and then they become an annex to the Assyrian Empire. So that's just a little side note. It was more for me than, I hope it was helpful. And then at that time that there were some dominant powers. Now, before it was Egypt, right? There's Egypt, but I didn't put that in there. But during this time, the first, second king time, Assyria was in one of the dominant powers of the northern, the north. And then Babylonian, of course, they are the ones who took over the southern kingdom. And I'm not sure about these, I know the Persians come afterwards, right? So that's just some background for you.
Yeah, that Persian time, that's Daniel's time.
But yeah, but Daniel's is during the exile and all that stuff, right? Yeah. Okay, so now we're gonna get into actually the Second Kings. The first couple of chapters talk about Elijah, and Elijah was the king. Which king is it? Now I have to go back and look at this thing. I think it was the king Ahaziah. He was sick or something, and so he wanted to know if he's gonna be okay. Anyway, he sends 50 men and a captain to Elijah to ask about, but they didn't come with the right attitude, and Elijah just calls on them, and then the fire comes down, and you remember that story? And that happens, and then, so I'm just gonna put that. And then Elisha is at this time, I guess, what do you call it? What is the term I'm looking for?
He's a prophet.
He's a prophet, but also he was under, what do you call that?
Oh, yeah, like an apprentice.
Yeah, apprentice, yes, thank you. Now, Elisha comes into play, and then I think that we talked about last week, also this week, it shows that Elisha says, okay, Elijah is about to be taken up, he does, by God into chariot and into the heaven. And Elisha says, oh, what am I gonna do without you and whatnot? And then he asked for double his Elijah's our spirit, whatever, and he gets it. And then one interesting thing was, one of the commentaries I read was that, the Israelites, the firstborn usually get double the inheritance, and they kind of equated that to Elijah to Elisha. And I thought that was interesting correlation for whatever the reason. Anyway, and then Elisha comes into the picture, and this section where Elisha comes in and he performs many miracles, I thought it was really bizarre. There was some bizarre stuff. We're not going to go through all of them, but he tells the Israel king that they are afraid, and he tells them to just dig a bunch of holes in the ground, and then those holes get filled with water from probably spring or something, and then because the sunlight just did a certain way, it looked like pools of blood, and the Syrians get all scared and they don't fight anymore, that kind of things. The other thing was the widow and the oil. There are a few things, but one particular one, I thought it was really more bizarre than anything else, is that, remember there was a Shunammite woman, and she was very hospitable. She prepared a room up in somewhere in the house for Elisha to stay and eat anytime he's coming through. So he was appreciative of her, so I asked her, what do you need? What do you want? And she says, well, I don't have any offspring. So he gives her a son, she bears a son, and later he dies, the son dies, and the way Elisha resuscitate the son is very bizarre. He lays on top of him, and I think there's what I call the first instance of a mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. But anyway, he had many very interesting miracles. That's what I was thinking. I just want to say that. But Northern Kingdom does come to an end in 722 BC. So 2 dates when it comes to the Northern and Southern Kingdom, you might want to remember. And Pastor John was in our quizzes. What is 722 BC? What is the significance? Fall of the northern kingdom to Assyrians. Let's see, let's look at chapter 17 of Second King. It's cold in here.
Yeah.
We're not gonna read all of it. Let's see, maybe 7. Let's see, from 19 to 23, if someone could read. Second Kings is chapter 17, verses 19 to 23.
Judah also did not keep the commandments of the Lord their God, but walked in the customs that Israel had introduced. And the Lord rejected all the descendants of Israel and afflicted them and gave them into the hand of plunderers until he had cast them out of his sight. When he had torn Israel from the house of David, they made Jeroboam the son of Nebat king. And Jeroboam drove Israel from following the Lord and made them commit great sin. The people of Israel walked in all the sins that Jeroboam did. They did not part from them until the Lord removed Israel out of his sight, as he had spoken by all his servants the prophets. So Israel was exiled from their own land to Assyria until this day.
Thank you. Now, there are several phrases and from those verses I would like to keep in mind. That Lord cast them from his sight. Okay, that's one phrase. And the other phrase I would like for you to try to keep in the back of your mind is that the Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, king. Because those will come repeatedly come throughout this book, especially in the later chapters. And there's some significance because these words are repeated over and over, and there's a reason for it. Okay, any questions so far? Comments, questions? Okay. Yeah, God wiped them out, removed them from his sight because they were privileged, but they were rebellious and apostate. Okay, Southern Kingdom. As you look at this, I didn't want to go through all the kings, but there are some outstanding kings, better kings than the rest. Now, as you noticed, all the kings in the Northern Kingdom were bad. There was no good king. And the other thing to note is that all the kings from the Northern Kingdom, they are not from David's line. They are from 9 different dynasties, if you will. Now, this Southern Kingdom, there are some good kings, but they had their share of bad kings. The one that I wanted to bring up as focus on is Hezekiah. Now, Hezekiah gets like about 3 chapters in this book. That's pretty significant because some of the kings only get like, few verses. Now, Hezekiah, why was he a good king? Because he trusted in the Lord. This is the verse 18, chapter 18, verse 5. Let me go back to verse 3 of 18. And he did what was right in the sight of the Lord, according to all that his father David had done. Remember, as I said, keep in mind God cast them from his sight. His sight is what is I'm zeroing in it. He did what was right in the sight of the Lord. And not only that, he did everything that David did. That including removing idols, worship things, and high altars and all that kind of stuff. And verse 5 said that he trusted in the Lord God of Israel, so that after him was none like him among all the kings of Judah nor who were before him. So he was really good. And so I wanted to look at some of these verses. I know it seems a little fragmented, but I have a reason for doing this. So if we go to 19:19, I'm gonna read it. Now therefore, O Lord our God, I pray, save us from his hand, that all the kingdoms on earth may know that you are the Lord God, you alone. So this is Hezekiah praying and also recognizing that it's not about his kingship, but it's about people will know that Yahweh is only God. So it's pointing to God and him alone. And then verse 34, it says, still this is Hezekiah's prayer continuing. It says, for I will defend this. No, this is not, this is God talking. Sorry. The verse 32 says, therefore thus says the Lord concerning the king of Assyria. He says, for I will defend this city to save it for my own sake and for my servant David's sake. Again, it's about God and his promise. And then chapter 20, verse 5 through 6. Hezekiah was sick and he petitioned and God granted him 15 extra years. And then verse 5 says, return and tell Hezekiah, the leader of my people, thus says the Lord, the God of David your father, I have heard your prayer. I have seen your tears. Surely I will heal you. On the third day you shall go up to the house of the Lord, and I will add to your 15 days. I will deliver you and this city from the hand of the king of Assyria. And I will defend this city for my sake and for the sake of my servant David. He's repeating the same thing that he said in verse 34. So again, one of the things that Hezekiah did right was that he was not making himself the star, that he was pointing back to God. And it's not about him, but it's about what God said. His name said. Any questions, comments? The other king that I wanted to highlight was in Josiah, and he is in chapter 20. So this is because an overview, we're not going to go through each king, since that's kind of like the point anyway. Josiah, after Hezekiah died, Manasseh was just the worst king of all. And then later on comes the Josiah. If you look at this chart here, this is the southern kingdom. So there's a Hezekiah, there was a good king, and then there's a bad Manasseh, bad Amon, and then Josiah the good. Okay. By the way, look at how all these kings died. That's just pretty bad. Anyway, I don't think that's 22 is correct.
It should be 22.
22, yes. Typo. So chapter 22, not verse chapter 20. Josiah was 8 years old when he became king, and he reigned 31 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Jedidah, the daughter of Adiah of Bozkath. And he did, this is the verse I wanted to key on. He did what was right in the sight of the Lord, again, sight of the Lord, and walked in all the ways of his father David, just like Hezekiah. He did not turn aside to the right hand or to the left. If I remember correctly, when Don read Deuteronomy 17, he talked about not turning to the right hand or the left. I mean, so he did right. Now, during his reign, Hilkiah, a priest, discovers the copy of the law. And Josiah, he breaks down, he mourns for the state of their country. And he just kind of cleans house, right? And he also reinstated Passover, because that hasn't happened in a long time. Now, Passover is a very significant, right? We talked about it in Exodus and what it means in terms of Christ and everything else, right? So those are some of the significant things he's done. And 23-25, why do I have that in there? Oh, now before him there was no king like him, who turned to the Lord with all his heart, with all his soul, and with all his might, according to all the law of Moses, nor after him did any arise like him. So after Josiah, if you look at the kings, the remainder of the kings, they're all bad kings. That's what he's talking about. But Southern Kingdom also falls to Babylon in 586 BC. So 722 BC, 586 BC. Any questions, comments? Okay. I call this the consequences. Remember, I said keep in mind the in the sight of the Lord. So many kings who was bad. I mean, every one of them, it said they did evil in the sight of the Lord. And the consequence of it, doing evil in the sight of the Lord, is that, like 17:18, the Lord was very angry with Israel and removed them from his sight. There was none left but the tribe of Judah alone. He wiped them out. Now, so I got to thinking about, what does it mean in the sight of the Lord? What do you think it means? Any idea?
Well, he sees everything.
When he sees us as his children. And he was a relationship. And he tells us what to do. Not because he wants to control us, but so that we become humble. You see the main theme here, going back and forth, right? But when he sees us, he not only loves us, but he provides protection and provisions. Now, go ahead.
Can I say one thing?
Yeah.
Back in chapter 18. Where is it? When you read, he removed the high places and broke the pillars and cut down the Ashtoreth.
Mm-hmm.
And he broke in pieces the bronze serpent that Moses had made.
Mm-hmm. That became an idol too.
That
right?
became an idol.
Yeah.
We're not to worship the things that God gives us.
Right.
Even though it's so easy to do.
Right.
I mean, why, God gave me this, I'm so thankful, and we're to be thankful. But so many times God gave us this, and it's very easy to say, God gave us this, therefore we will worship it.
Yeah, it's okay if we worship it because it's come from God.
Because it come from God.
Right.
And that's sometimes that's a hard line, but the between thankfulness, because a lot of times in worship, we're always thankful and worship and thankful, but we don't worship what God gave us. We're thankful for it, but still the focus got to say, and a lot of times I think they were doing evil in the sight of the Lord. They were doing evil in the sight of the Lord, but it wasn't evil to them. They had lost their way.
They have lost the way.
And
Some of them were actually blatantly doing evil
Yeah.
inside, and some of them may not have known, right? But I think many of the time, many of the kings, I mean, the standard was very clear
mhm,
in Deuteronomy, right? You know, it has to be God's chosen person, chosen by God, who fear God, has to obey him. He has to, you know, not rely on anything else,
Mhm.
like, you know, the political alliance, wealth, and military power, or any of that, right? The standard is very clear, but they did it anyway, so I think many times they knew. It
Well,
was
and also, the prophets were going to them and telling them.
exactly,
At
so,
this point, I mean,
Yeah.
Isaiah and Jeremiah and all those guys were going and talking to them and telling them, hey, you need to turn your ways, and
but they were
they
like,
didn't.
no,
Stiff
yeah,
neck.
yeah.
yeah, and it hasn't changed.
No, because people,
Still struggle with it.
Yeah, that's you know, that's the thing. One thing I love about all we're doing in this whole series is that, yeah, we think, man, those people 3,000 years ago, but boy, they were, you know, they really did some dumb things. And people say, why would you read the Old Testament? That's ancient history. No, it's
people.
Very relevant to
it's
today.
right here.
Yeah. And so when they did evil in the sight of the Lord, I mean, these are some of the consequences. And God said he would, do it, right?
Mhm.
Mhm.
Susie, may I say something?
Yeah,
Yes,
go ahead, Thelma.
If you look at Numbers 6:24-26, when you said in the sight of the Lord, this is the Aaronic benediction which Moses taught Aaron and his sons. May the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you. That means you are in his sight and he's blessing you. And he be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. That's the Aaronic benediction that they have every Saturday. And it is in line with what you're saying, that you have to be in the sight of the Lord. You have to be blessed, like those people who were in Mount Ebal versus those who were in Mount Gerizim, the curses and the blessings.
Yeah,
thank you,
Thank you,
Thelma.
Thelma.
Yeah, that's very true. Because if you are not in the sight, you know, when the Lord turns his face, that means he's disowning you, right? So, I mean, he's removing his blessings and protection, right? So that's the significance of in the sight of the Lord, in his sight. And he said he will remove it, he does, he turns his head. So these are all the consequences of the kingdom. Those kings who did evil in the sight of the Lord. What about who did what was right in the sight of the Lord? The Lord was with him and he prospered wherever he went. This is Hezekiah 18:7, for example. Now, what about the kings? Some of the kings were partially good. They did good in the sight of the Lord, but or yet they did not remove the high places and the idols and things like that. So they did a partial obedience. What do you think their consequence was? So this again goes to the God's command that we shall love the Lord with all of our hearts and mind and strength.
He has no gray, it's either black or white.
Exactly. When it comes to obeying him, it's either all or none. There's no partial. So the partial obedience is no obedience. Dude, that's really hard.
You're right.
That
I
is
do
hard.
everything right in the sight of the Lord on Sunday morning. Yeah.
Wait a minute.
Yeah, it's like,
So I just put that in there because there were some kings who did, who tried, but they didn't do it all the way. Any comments, questions? Okay, so what now? Now the both Northern Kingdom and Southern Kingdom, 722 BC, 586 BC, they're gone. So now what happens? Now let's look at the 2 Samuel chapter 7. As you can see, book of Bible is just not book by itself. It's all ties to different parts of the Bible. 2 Samuel 7. This is the I have trouble saying covenant with David. Let's look at especially verses 8 through 16. Can I have someone read that, please?
8 through 16.
Yes, thank you.
Now therefore, thus you shall say to my servant David, thus says the Lord of hosts, I took you from the pasture, from following the sheep, that you should be prince over my people Israel. And I have been with you wherever you went, and have cut off all your enemies from before you. And I will make for you a great name, like the name of the great ones of the earth. And I will appoint a place for my people Israel, and will plant them, so that they may dwell in their own place, and be disturbed no more. And violent men shall afflict them no more, as formerly, from the time that I appointed the judges over my people Israel. And I will give you rest from all of your enemies. Moreover, the Lord declares to you that the Lord will make you a house. When your days are fulfilled and you lie down with your fathers, I will raise up your offspring after you, who shall come from your body, and I will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son. When he commits iniquity, I will discipline him with the rod of men, with the stripes of the sons of men. But my steadfast love will not depart from him, as I took it from Saul, whom I put away from before you. And your house and your kingdom shall be made sure forever before me. Your throne shall be established forever.
Thank you. So in this covenant with David, God promises to some parts of it is during the David's lifetime, and then some parts of it is after David's time. And he talks about the offspring. Remember, the Solomon, when he was the king, I mean, the throne of Solomon was pretty good, right? Until Solomon messed it up, but he expanded the land and everything else. So that's the first portion of the covenant. And the second portion is the after David's death. This is the future. This is where it's pointing to. See the small s versus the capital S. So small s is the son of David is Solomon and his kingdom, and the capital S is pointing to Jesus Christ, the eternal kingdom. That's really the gist of it. But he also says that the line of his kingdom will come from both the seed of David, whether it's in his lifetime or after. The earthly earth as well as the in the future. This is Messianic proclamation, the covenant. Any comments, questions? Okay. So now both kingdoms are gone, and all the kings have been basically killed by whether it's murder or suicide or all kinds of stuff, right? After 400 years, more than 400 years, both kingdoms are gone. Oh, when I was reading, I thought this was very interesting. We go to chapter 25, verse 26. I don't know what let's see. It says, And all the people, small and great, and the captains of the armies arose and went to Egypt, for they were afraid of Chaldeans. Didn't they leave? I mean, Exodus out of Egypt? And after, 400 years of when that, they go back to Egypt when they got scared. I thought that was very interesting. I don't know what the significance is, but I just found it very interesting. This is basically all the maps. The Carl Rasmussen, remember him?
Mhm.
I bought this book because it's very, very helpful. And he says, this is a quote, he says, the second Exodus. God's gonna allow a second Exodus for his people to keep this seed, to make his kingdom happen. The first time the Exodus was from Egypt, but this time Exodus will be Babylon. And not all the kings were killed. There's one key king that got spared, Joash. Let's look at chapter 11. This is when, is it Jezebel? Oh, how many seconds? The Kings. Kings 11.
What book?
No.
What book are you in now? Chapter 11 of what book?
Oh, Second Kings, it's Atalia, huh? What was it say?
Second Kings, chapter 11.
I mean,
But Joash, it says that he was murdered by servants. It was Josiah who was wounded in battle. So you said Joash didn't die? Wasn't killed?
no, he wasn't.
Thank
There
you.
is
So according to this, it says he was murdered by servants.
later. Wait a minute. Where are you looking at?
No, that's Ammon.
I have a Joash.
It
He's the
says grandson, and it says 40 years, and it says murdered by servants.
Oh, yeah.
But this Josiah down here just says wounded in battle. It doesn't say he was killed.
Let's look at the verse, chapter 11, verses 1 through 10. Somebody else read these verses because there are too many names I can't pronounce. Verses 1 through 3 of chapter, the Second Kings chapter 11.
I can
Oh,
do it.
Go ahead, Thelma.
When Athaliah, the mother of Ahaziah, saw that her son was dead, she arose and destroyed all the heirs. But Josheba, the daughter of King Joram, sister of Ahaziah, took Joash, the son of Ahaziah, and stole him away from the king's sons who were being murdered, and they hid him and his nurse in the bedroom from Ahaziah, so that he was not killed. You want me to go on?
Yeah, verse 3.
So he was hidden with her in the house of the Lord for 6 years, while Ahaziah reigned over the land. In the 7th year,
That's it. Thank
Okay.
you. So when Atalia, the nutty queen, who was reigning for 6 years, I think she did, she wanted to make sure that all the seeds were killed, but Joash was spared. Now later he became the king. Now, all the kings died, whether they were murdered or wounded or not, but he's from his line. All the kings after are still from David's line. Does that help, Diane?
Oh, yeah, okay, I understand.
Yeah. So even amongst all that, so God orchestrated so that the seed of David still remained, even though everybody was wiped out.
Hmm.
And then the last few words of the Second Kings. I'm gonna read this. This is Second Kings chapter 25, verses 28 to 30. He spoke kindly to him and gave him more. This is a Babylonian king being kind to a king of Judah who was in captivity, Jehoiachin, the king of Judah. He was in the prison, but then he released him, and so this is a Babylonian king talking to the king of Judah. That's what he says. He, the king of Babylon, he spoke kindly to him, king of Judah, and gave him more prominent seat than those of the kings who were with him in Babylon. So Jehoiachin changed from his prison garments, and he ate bread regularly before the king all the days of his life. And as for his provisions, there was a regular ration given him by the king, a portion for each day, all the days of his life. So, for whatever the reason, this Babylonian king treated this king of Judah nicely. And anyway, so there is still a hope. So God's gonna ensure the covenant with David remains, the seed remains. I mean, it's a pretty bad story, if you were, pretty bad history, actually. The book of Kings, as well as book of part of Samuel and the Chronicles. So gospel. Satan's goal was to terminate the Messianic line, right? And this one goes all the way to Genesis 3:15, where God says the seed of the woman will bruise the head of the, yes, and the seed of Satan will bruise his heel. It goes all the way back to us. Again, the Bible is just so consistent. And God weaves his redemptive plan through all this misbehavior, rebellious, apostate people. And because he's loving and patient, he sends these prophets and messengers to warn them, teach them, but thick-headed people.
That's why in the end he sent Jesus. They have him do us because we couldn't do it.
So what happens when people think that do what's right in their eyes instead of what's right in the sight of the Lord? And I know we put a lot of emphasis on kings, but kingdom is as strong as the leader. Kings, some kings were not leader. I think leader is different than the. How about us? Who's in charge of my life? Who's in charge of our life? And that's all I have, and we are just right on time.
Good job.
Any questions, comments?
That was very good.
Good.
Thank you.
I know you put a lot of time in it, and it shows.
Thank you.